So is that like all apostles are elders, not all elders are apostles?
Correct.
I want you to give those to the sources. Otherwise, we have to find the hopefully not a demonic yet AI.
The Bible. I mean,
I know it's in the Bible, Chris. I'm saying like give me a Bible address.
So First Timothy is going to describe Timothy as a elder, and then it's going to, it speaks of Timothy as a fellow elder, and so that would make Paul an elder when he's writing the letter to Timothy. So,
Well, how long are you leaving us for?
like 20 minutes. Oh, B-Dubs is here. He can entertain you.
No, he's not. You gone?
Yeah. But we did a great. If you look at my replays just yesterday, we had the failure of Eastern Orthodoxy room. It was good fun. We listened to the entire Ancient Paths TV thing where they go through the different topics of how Eastern Orthodoxy fails, and it was good times. So, anywho, I gotta run. I'll be back.
Yeah, that's exactly what you do every time you run your mouth about a church you don't understand. Is you run.
Oh,
It's
see,
like,
wait,
wait,
you
from
go
that.
for one read of Orthodoxy gear and one read this.
No, sir. You move the claim. You want to do
No, I
it
didn't.
Roman Catholicism. You move the goalpost again. You can't defend the things you say online, and you refuse to defend them. This is false.
I think he was saying Kelly has to go to a client meeting.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to my client meeting. I'll see you guys later.
So is that what you did, James? Yesterday you and Chris thought about orthodoxy?
No, sir.
Oh, were you just picking up on that, or you don't know about it?
He did a space. I went in there for all of 10 seconds.
I mean, I guess orthodoxy is bad.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube video made by some guy in Utah, that he says dispels orthodoxy, which is wild. Protestantism has never systematically answered the Orthodox Church. It just hasn't. So the idea that Chris has it or some guy on YouTube has it when I, specifically challenged Chris to answer his claim, which was that the Orthodox Church is a bloodthirsty murder cult because of their conduct at the Council of Berea, which is wild because it was the Orthodox who were butchered at Berea. He just can't answer for it. So he likes to come on here, surround himself with people who don't belong to the church, and run his mouth, which is all he does. And then he runs, just as he ran from me.
Well, to be fair, he has said for a little.
This is not the first time.
Well, I don't doubt that this time he did say it for about 5 or so minutes before you got here. But anyway, what's going on?
So the question you ask is interesting, and if I can fight my corner here for a second, this is where the tradition of the church is useful, because including the requirement that a preacher or an elder be a husband to one wife and have well-ordered children, the first requirement is that they be above reproach, and no one is above reproach, not one person. So inherent in the idea of these rules is that no one satisfies them entirely. And the role that the episcopate has to play in exercising the economia to say, all right, to what extent are we going to relax these rules in order to ordain elders, because we have to ordain elders. We can't refrain from ordaining elders. That's not consistent with the commission that we are given by God, is to say to what extent, how, and which ones can be flexible or in the context of the authority to bind and loose, can be relaxed in order to ordain someone. And it's not as clear, I think, as some people are suggesting. But it is that that's essentially the system. Not to say, okay, what is biblical, what is unbiblical, because what is biblical here is clearly you must be a husband. You must be a husband to one wife. You must have children. Those children must be well disciplined. You must be above reproach. You may not be a drunkard. All these things, right? But no one's gonna live up to that, even that if that's exactly what the Bible says.
Well, yeah, let me just hit some verses real quick. Pardon me while I speak this in voice because it's way easier than typing it. You guys will hear clicks. But yeah, so if you just read the qualifications, if you just do a on its face reading, it seems like a decently strong case to say that and we'll pull it up for a minute, that you probably should be married and have kids. But it's there seems to be some wiggle room. So Chris's case, which I'll try to find whatever sources he was talking about, and he was saying, well, look, Paul and some of the other apostles were also elders in conversations. It references them as elders. So here, let me just get these references up real fast. Okay, single men be pastors according to the Bible.
Yeah, but that's cursory. See, you have elders in the Bible who are.
Mess me up, James. Well, I'm trying to speak this.
I'm conceding your point.
Well, right, but you're also talking, jacking me up. Just give me a second. Let me speak this. Cursory reading from the qualifications. If you read it literally and strictly, you must have a wife and you must have children. Period. So please list in Timothy and Titus those full verses in context, and also any examples you can have of someone like Paul or Timothy, who Paul is an apostle, but apparently he makes reference that his fellow elder Timothy, implying that Paul was also an elder. Give any biblical passages in reference to anyone who we see as an apostle, also conflating it or being in addition to apostle and elder, or any sort of person who singularly was an elder, who was unmarried and did not have children.
I mean, I don't, and the other qualification I would add is if we're going to be this particular about the use of language, I would say what's the word in the Greek, and then how often is that word in the Greek used? I wouldn't be interested in words in the English translation.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we got to start somewhere, so we would start
Right.
with the English translation and then go to the Greek.
Sure, but but that's easy enough to do.
Of course, yeah. Well, I've looked at this before, and it seems like they're on its face, unless there's some buzzwords like that, like by the way, Paul's talking, my fellow elder Timothy. I mean, if there's some stuff like that I have not uncovered, I can't seem to find an example of someone who's actually serving as an elder or overseer of a church who is not married and doesn't have kids. I'm going through memory. It's been a while since I looked into that. But yeah, so someone posted a poll. This whole thing came from a Twitter poll, and it says apparently 64% say no to both. You don't need to be married and you don't need to have kids. That's 64% of the people. almost 14% said yes to both. And then there's some other mixed answers. But that's where this question came from, because I'm under the impression, and it makes sense, right? Which, the foolishness of God is, higher than the intelligence of man, or whatever that Bible verse is. So it's like, well, you don't want to lean too much on your own understanding, but your own understanding makes a pretty logical case. So if you're reading it as it's written, like if you're like having Gilmore playing the ball where it lays, let's just go and read these qualifications that are very clear. I mean, the way they're, words on the page, it's easy to find. So let's go here. Let's go to Titus first. We'll go to, so Titus 1, we're going to start in 5. Make sure I screen there. And this is what we're talking about that everyone knows, right? So if you just read these without over-interpreting, this is why I left you Greece, so you might be put, so that you might put what remained in order, and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and his children are believers, and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination, for an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant, or quick-tempered, or a drunkard, or violent, or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-control, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, and also rebuke those who contradict. So, by the way, lots of men are not qualified just from that list. But yeah, so it's how you read this, and I can see it holds water both ways, because a lot of times people will make the same case for women in ministry, and they'll play with the text. So then if you say, well, no, if you're going to play with the text that way and say, no, you can't do that, that's improper. Well, it seems like you're kind of playing with the text the other way. If you say, well, no, okay, so let's go back to that part. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife. Well, no, that just means if you're married, you only have one wife. Is that what that means? Because if you just read this on its face, it says the husband of one wife, so you should be married to one wife, and his children are believers. Well, no, that's saying if you have children. That's not what it says. It's saying, and his children are believers. So if you read this very strictly, the way it's written, you must have a wife, only one, and you must have children who are believers. And it does make sense, granted, from a human wisdom standpoint, because how can you give premarital counseling to your congregation? How can you properly shepherd the body of Christ, God's flock? How can you shepherd them if you can't relate to them? How can you give advice on how to parent and raise children in a godly way if you don't have children who you've raised and parented in a godly way? So it does make sense why you would want to be these things. But then if you start playing, and I'll let you talk there in a minute, James, but if you do start playing with the text and say, well, no, that means if you're married, you have to have one wife. You don't have to be married. Okay. And if you have children, well, you don't have to have children, but if you do, they need to be believers. Well, if you start playing with the text that way, then you keep playing with the text and say, well, no, husband of one wife, that means spouse of one spouse. So, if you're a single woman, if you have a spouse, it can only be one, and it has to be a husband. Okay, now you've played with the text a little more. Now you get the gay affirming people who are like, well, no, the same way you did that with a single man is fine, and now lady pastors are fine. We're doing the same thing you guys did, except now we're saying spouse of one spouse. So, you can be a gay man married to another gay man because you only have one spouse. And then all the people that say single pastors are fine, and all the people that say lady pastors are fine, now they're going to have a problem with the gay affirming pastor. It's like, no. And then it's like the hypocrisy almost shows. It's like, no, you took it too far. And then the gay affirming pastor is like, well, how did we take it too far? We're doing the same thing you're doing. It just means spouse of one spouse. So, if you're a gay man who's single, you can be a pastor. If you're a gay man who's married to only one spouse, you can be pastors. That's exactly what you're doing. And then the single male pastor people and the lady pastor people, their heads just explode. So it starts a slippery slope if you don't read it as it's written. So the only saving grace is if we can find specific examples, like Chris is adamant about, like Paul calling Timothy his fellow elder and things like that. That would be the only saving grace. Go ahead, James.
No, I mean, I think you're spot on. The Greek presbyteros has the same application as the English word we're using, so I know I was stressing translation. It doesn't seem to have yielded much.
Yeah, and let's go ahead, and then maybe if Chris wants to say anything about how we're all wrong and stupid. Let's see. We'll go to Timothy 3 real fast. The same is trustworthy if anyone aspires to the office of overseer. He desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach. Above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? That's exactly what we said, right? But he must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace into the snare of the devil. So again, Chris, I don't know if you're back or if you're just listening, but I have a handful of sources that I haven't looked at yet. But I know I looked into this before I was telling James, and I couldn't find any example of someone being an elder or overseer that didn't have a wife or kids. But then if you say Paul, refers to Timothy as a fellow elder or something like that, I'm interested to dig into that. But that's where we are at this point, because you probably heard my gay affirming pastor thing. It's basically exactly the same, unless there's allowance in there where Paul calls Timothy elder. He's like, by the way, I'm totally an apostle and missionary, but I'm also an elder.
So, all I would say, I'm over at my client. There's nobody here. So, all I would say is, we just have to take the text for the text. And so, I get what you're saying, and that somebody could twist the text. But just because somebody can twist the text doesn't mean that we force it into saying something that it's not. I mean,
show me Timothy's wife. Is Timothy married? We don't know. We have no
There's the
idea.
absence of evidence of absence.
Right. No, but my point being though is that this is a stricture for presbyters / overseers. So the first thing we should say is that the office of overseer / presbyter is the same. There's not multiple offices. There's just deacons and overseers as it's used in the Bible. So the words are interchangeable.
Overseer okay, so like we would say overseer is interchangeable with bishop, presbyter, pastor, shepherd.
Correct.
We would say it's interchangeable with that. Deacons seem to be a slightly different category. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
And then apostle has nothing to do with any of that. That's completely different.
Right. Like you just said, the fingers and thumbs.
Right. So now we're focusing on, let's see, 1 Peter 5:1. We could dig into this. And, but Paul may have been married, right? There was evidence of that. And then you get into a whole other rat's nest. Well, what if you're married faithfully and then your wife dies? Can you still be a pastor? Well, if you're taking that hard line, like you have to have a wife to be married, it's like, well, you had a wife and you were adhering to the strictest interpretation of this, but now your wife got hit by a bus and she's dead. So now do you have to not be a pastor? Or can you continue being a pastor even by the hardest reading of that text? In 5:1, 1 Peter 5:1, he says, I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ. So we can dig into that, but then again, was Paul married? And if he was married, was he married at the time? But that's like a whole different rat's nest to go down. What would you say about that? Do you fall down on the side that Paul had a wife then, ever had a wife?
Yeah, no, I don't think Paul was ever married.
Ever? Let's see.
That's more of a
And then-
modern appellation.
Okay. And then, yeah, in Acts 14, so Paul appointed, we need to separate, what the Bible actually says versus the flavor this is giving. So Paul appointed in Acts 14:23 gave Timothy and Titus instructions on doing the same. That says he appointed elders. Let's check out those real fast. So Paul saying the unmarried and the widows, it's good to remain single. That has nothing to do with this. Let's check out 1 Peter 5:1.
So I just also posted a nice article about the
Okay, 1 Peter 5:1. Okay, so I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ. So, I mean, as far as Paul is concerned, then that would really hinge on, if what you say, Chris, is a modern thing that he ever was married or something like that. So we could just set Paul aside and we would need to focus on Timothy and Titus. I think they're the next runners up, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, like, look, so here's from the article I posted. The issue is not the elders or deacons' marital status, but his moral and sexual purity. This qualification heads the list because it is in this area that elders are most prone to fail. Some take the qualification for deacons. A deacon must be a husband of one wife, as meaning that the man, to be a deacon, he must be married. This is not the meaning of husband of one wife in the Greek. The phrase husband of one wife literally reads one woman man. For a man to be considered for a position in church leadership and he is married, he must be committed to his one wife. This qualification is speaking of fidelity in marriage and sexual purity. It is not a requirement of marriage. If it were, a man would have to be married and also have children, because the second half of 1 Timothy 3:12 states, and he must manage his children and household well. So we should understand this qualification as if a man is married, he must be faithful to his wife. If a man has children, he must be managed them well. That's all.
yeah, I mean, and that's fine. But regardless of, where this ends, like, as much as this comes up, like, let's do our diligence. So, I mean, it makes sense both ways. Like, yeah, I see both ways. So, let's just drill down as much as we can. So, like, Acts 14:23, I'm asking, like, it doesn't seem to, I'm sure this is talking about Titus and Timothy, but it doesn't mention them anywhere around those verses. So, do you know, before I go reading whole chapters, how far back it gives reference to Timothy and Titus and why this is referring to seems, unless you can correct me quickly, this is just inferred because it doesn't mention my name. So one of the arguments would be Timothy and Titus were single men with no children, presumably, and they were elders. And then one of the scripture references is Acts 14:23. But all Acts 14:23 says is, and when they had appointed elders, so who is they, and had appointed elders? Who are elders? Because the assumption from this argument is Paul is part of they and appointed Timothy and Titus as elders. But it doesn't say that. So my question is, how far back do we have to go to understand that they means Paul and elders means Timothy and Titus? Comprende?
Yeah, I get you. But yeah, I mean,
You
you
don't
just
know?
have to keep going through the passage. I mean, that's just
Okay, well,
observing
okay,
what's in the passage.
Right. I just, you're pretty good at this stuff. I just hoped I wouldn't have to read.
Sorry, I'm like really distracted right now because I'm trying to finish this computer before I have to go to our meeting.
Let's see. Okay, so it's saying this verse is referring to Paul and Barnabas appointing elders in the churches they planted. This thing's conflating apostle and elder. So it's saying this is Paul and Barnabas acting in apostolic authority. Great. Nothing to do with the pastor. If they were also elders, apostolic authority is a different category. It doesn't mention Timothy and Titus. So where did Timothy and Titus come in? They're mentioned elsewhere. Where elsewhere? As Paul's close ministry partners, Paul instructs them to appoint elders. But we know that elders are to be appointed typically from the congregation, right? The people will appoint the elders. So it doesn't take a special qualification, other than I imagine being a Christian, to be part of the group of people who appoint elders. So the fact that Paul did it when he was setting up the church doesn't mean we talked before, like a house church. If there's a house church and it grows and whatever and becomes like an actual legit church, well then the people, the congregation will appoint elders from among themselves, right? Like the Bible says. So the people who are doing the appointing don't necessarily have to have these special qualifications. With me so far? Yes, Nate, you're amazing.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see, Titus 1:5. This is where Titus is tasked with appointing elders. So this is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained in order and appoint elders in every town. So that doesn't automatically mean I'm looking for where Titus and Timothy are appointed elders. This has them appointing, or this has Titus appointing elders. And by the way, I guess that's the case that one person can, without other evidence, this suggests that one person could appoint elders. I think a lot of people would have a problem with that, and maybe there's evidence that even though he says this is why I left you in charge, that you
he's tasked by an apostle. So that's
okay. That is a case to be made. Okay, so then this shows Titus functioning as leadership capacity. I'm sure there is evidence in here, and since there's no Hebrew Israelites to give us questions, we'll just keep drilling down into this. But if it's just going to be more of these type rabbit holes, it's going to sound like a case can be made on either side, the determining factor being where you fall in the inference. So if you're inferring that these people were single and had no children, and you're also inferring that they are elders, in different shapes and forms. So it's like we need the holistic conclusion of one of these people specifically being appointed as an elder or being an elder, not something like functioning as minister partners or functioning as part of a church setup, but we need one of these people specifically being an elder who are not specifically married with kids, without having to infer anything. And I remember from looking at this before, I looked into it pretty good. I think we're just left with holding the bag with a bunch of inferences. And I would say that's why I'm not going to fight to the death over, well, much of anything, except maybe my life, my family. As we're called to do, husbands, love your wives and be real willing to lay down your life for her. But lay down your life can mean go down swinging, just saying. But James, do you have any thoughts on this while we continue to dive into it? He is asleep. Let's see if there's anything in the chat. If you believe that Jesus man is God, then you are similar to Hindus. They believe that so many men were gods in India. line, just to say your famous line.
I don't know what's my famous line.
I don't know, something about idiot or retarded.
I mean, look, Jesus claimed to be God. He claimed to be Yahweh directly, multiple times. The Jews understood this. They picked up stones to stone him for his claims of being Yahweh. And so the idea that Jesus is just a man would fall apart. Okay? You're going to be subject to the trilemma at that point. So that Jesus is either insane, he's alive, or he is who he said he is. And so our Islamic friends don't really have any logic to stand on when they claim that Jesus was just a man. Same thing with our Unitarian friends.
So
And the other problem is that the Islamic concept of God is illogical. It cannot stand with logic, because a unitary God does not adhere to the laws of logic. It would break down into absurdity.
I'm just going to speak this again because it's easier to type. I'm trying to find something where there is a black and white open shut case of an elder mentioned in the New Testament church who is not inferred as an elder or not thought of as a ministry partner, but specifically called elder or overseer or the equivalent. And apostle is not the equivalent, that's a different category. So I'm trying to find some example in the Bible anywhere in the New Testament regarding someone specifically called elder without being inferred as such, but called that, who is not married and does not have children. And again, not inferred as such, specifically said as such. So there is no room for inference. Period. I'm pretty sure there is not a case. Is there anything you could find? And if not, what is the absolute closest case you can get to it? Would it be what we're talking about with Paul and Timothy and Barnabas and Titus? Are those the closest possible examples? Because there is still some inferences you would have to make in the cases of those. For example, you would have to know Paul was never married, and there's some people, right or wrong, who dispute that. And same thing with Timothy and Titus. You would have to know they were not married and did not have children and were also specifically called elders. And it makes sense that we would refer to them as that, and I believe they are that. But make the case black and white, open shut in the Bible. Can you or can you not? We are marshaling the powers of large language models. And let's see, Bible is telling you man is not God at all.
That's true, all except for the incarnation of Christ, who is unique.
Okay, so
Just keeps like spouting claims. I mean, I don't know what good that is. Like, I mean, I just gave him a specific Bible reference.
well, yeah, I mean, if you want to, Ismail, if you want to go to like Bible Gateway and like read the reference Chris gave you, and then let us know what you think about that and how you accept or refute that, that could be productive. But I think we have to put a lid on this because I mean, I've done this before and was left kind of holding the bag, and it seems we still are. So I have no problem believing that. Well, I don't know about Paul as an elder. Well, okay, so he did say my fellow elder. So I want to explore that. So if Paul identifies himself as elder, and was it Timothy he was talking to when he said fellow elder? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes care of that. I think. What about Barnabas and Titus? Were they specifically called elders, or is that just assumed like they were among the groups?
I mean, they're assumed to be elders. They were founding churches.
Okay, and are we claiming some sort of apostolic exception? Because we know you don't have to be an elder to found a church. You have a congregation who comes together under the name of Jesus, and when it becomes time to, actually do something more than just like home Bible study, you have non-qualified people from the body appointing elders and overseers. So we can assume, are we saying that's a one-off exception because it was under apostolic authority or something like that? Because we know you don't have to be an elder to appoint elders.
Right. I mean, like, just the church body itself, the covenant community appoints elders.
So we can't absolutely say it's a case that some of these people were elders just because they founded churches, because non-elders can found churches by appointing elders. So we'd have to use more than that. And again, like I believe this. I have no problem believing there were apostles and elders and all this. It makes sense. But in trying to make a bulletproof case, I don't think someone can make a bulletproof case, because there's enough room there to say, well, no, there's a group of 20 people, none of them are elders. They came together in Bible study and realized that they're uniting under the banner of Christ. Now they need elders, so now they appointed elders. Okay, so let's see. Carefully nuanced and da. You're absolutely right to frame it. Oh, thank you. Okay, it's supposed to be called elder. Okay, so apparently, as best as our large language models can do, and I'm willing to say I've been thorough enough about this that if someone can find what we have not, and apparently the internet has not, there is no such person explicitly described in the New Testament. So I'm happy and fine with a lot of these inferences, but when it comes down to reading the passages again, and it specifically says husband of one, this comes into human understanding again, like human understanding versus God's understanding. So when it comes down to husband of one wife and children must be believers, if you're being strict, it means what it means. If you're being a little loose, it makes sense. I would probably go a long way in agreeing with it and being like, oh yeah, well, it doesn't say they were married with kids, and for all we know, they probably weren't. So that's fine to be a single male pastor. But again, that's for all we know. If someone wants to poke holes and say there's no explicit mention of their marital and familial status, then we have to say, well, you're right, there is no explicit mention of that. So if you want to be super hardline and say husband of one wife means you have to be a one-woman man, which means you have to be married to a woman, then we can't really refute that biblically in a bulletproof way. I guess you'd have to agree, Chris, right? I mean, it makes sense that you can be a single pastor based on biblical evidence, but not in a bulletproof way.
And I've done a brief note up, and what it appears is that the rule you're citing, which seems to be correct, also seems to hold true for the Old Testaments. There are Old Testament patriarchs and prophets whose spouses aren't mentioned, but there doesn't seem to be one who explicitly is held as a bachelor.
And also, I remember when I was in Bible college, it's the Assemblies of God, so they appoint lay pastors too. But there was a guy, the guy was like 20, he was like 20 years old. I think he was like 20 years old. He would have been 21 when he graduated, probably, I think. So it was right after Bible college, and that's gosh, was it MySpace still, or maybe it's Facebook. I don't know, whatever was around then. I think it was before Facebook. Maybe it was a MySpace. Anyways, social media was just beginning to emerge in a way that everyone used it, and I think not long after graduation, he became a pastor of a church, and he was a single man, and he was 21. And you say, well, see, your ordination system allowed it. Well, but they also allow lady pastors, so take that for what you will.
And this might have an outsized effect on the practice of having youth pastors.
Yeah. So I just think if you're being super strict, it shouldn't be a problem. Like, there should be enough qualified people, because it's like, well, how do you, what, Sean? I don't want to repeat myself too many times. Sean, you come up here presumably to speak about this, but what do you have to say? Welcome, Sean.
Good morning, first of all, everyone. I'm gonna say this. Listen, if we have in the Old Testament, Jeremiah sure wasn't there. In the New Testament, Paul sure wasn't there. And Paul wrote the majority of the New Testament that we know of. So if Paul is very clear to Timothy, and we don't know if Timothy is married or not, because in his letters to Timothy, he does not mention Timothy's wife. But he said, "Let no one despise your youth." He's a young man. He's really young, and he's pastoring. So, in might be spiritually mature, but they might not be ready for having someone in their house because they have really just learned how to live by themselves, pay their bills, and all these other things. It's one of the things that you learn when you grow up and you move out of your parents' house. So I had no problem with a single pastor. But after a while, a little bit later, as he gets a little bit older, I'm pretty sure he's going to be looking for someone, looking for a companion. And when he finds that companion, notice what I'm saying, because bishop is clear, the bishop has to be a husband. All right? The word pastor is the word for shepherd, pointman. So the pointman and episcopos are two different words. Different. So I had no problem with a young pastor being single. So as he matures in age, he'll search and he'll find him a wife. And the Lord will bless him and bless his quiver and all that. But as far as one of the bishops, I don't mind holding any other ministry title because we see prophetess, we see one of the first to evangelize to tell Jesus was alive was Mary, Mary Magdalene. So, but as far as them being bishops, because you can't be a bishop and be a woman and have a wife.
Wait,
I don't care.
We mean, let's clarify. I think we mean different things by bishops. So I think I'm sure you mean something different by that. But correct me if I'm wrong. Even if you disagree, a lot of people conflate, I think correctly, so you may say incorrectly, overseer, shepherd, pastor, elder, bishop, presbyter. A lot of people conflate or interchange all of those terms as one. Would you agree with that? Even if you don't agree that bishop's in that, you would agree that a lot of people see all of those terms as interchangeable, but you don't.
They see those terms interchangeable when you look at the Greek. All right, presbyter is the word for elder. All right. Paul tells Timothy he had hands laid on him by the Presbyterian, not the elders. Bishop is episcopos.
Right.
But it says it's the same. But it says it's the same word as overseer. It says overseer, like in the English. So this may be a King James thing, but it's in English translations. I think King James, maybe New King James, it says bishop and overseer are different. But that's English words. It all goes back to episcopos, just like you said, Sean. The other words. So overseer and bishop are both the same Greek word, but in English they use bishop and overseer as different words.
Right.
Different English words.
Right.
It's the same Greek word.
Right. Like the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, which is headed out of New Orleans by Bishop Paul F. Morton. He had overseers under him.
Well, I understand the structure that we made it, but
Okay. So that I'm just using a westernized to explain the difference. All right. But the word pastor is poimen. Poimen in the Greek. So when you look at the definition of that word, comparing it to episcopos, then you might see a little something different. Because when you look at poimen, it means shepherd.
well, that's true. So we basically have different areas where, like Ephesians, and the Titus and Timothy. So I mean, this is a different goal from what we're doing, but this is basically to come down on all of the terms used, get rid of anything in English, and go back to the Greek words, which would be poimen versus episcopos. But so when we're talking about prophets, evangelists, and shepherds, that could be interchangeably, I think rightly, that could be interchangeably with pastor. But then episcopos is also rightly used for pastor. So basically there are multiple Greek words that would define a pastor or shepherd, and also either this presbyter or bishop. So if you say, well, a bishop is episcopos, and a presbyter is episcopos, and then a pastor is also episcopos, but then a pastor is also a shepherd, a poiemon. You have two words for the same thing. So basically, I think rightly, all of these offices can be used, or all these titles for offices can be used interchangeably. And if you want to say, poiemon is a bishop, that may be slightly weird. The better word choice may be episcopos, but that's the same word choice for overseer and elder, which is a pastor. But then if that pastor is also rightly called a shepherd, poiemon. So that's how you get all of these. Some people see it unjust conflations, but I think biblically it's all sound. So you've got poiemon and episcopos, essentially meaning someone in charge of the church. And then when they appoint elders under them, you could basically say they're the exact same people, the same qualifications, but there needs to be one shepherd, one pastor, one bishop of the church, and then all the elders underneath them are basically the exact same people. So if the pastor, elder, shepherd gets hit by a lightning, any of these other elders, by being elders, they've already met the qualifications in Titus and Timothy for being poiemon, episcopos. So one of them could be appointed, just jump right up there. They don't need to be more thoroughly vetted, because by way of them being an elder in the first place, they've already essentially been a poiemon and episcopos. They just haven't served as that church's shepherd. They've served as elders under them, but equally, they're equally qualified the same, according to the words used. Would you agree with that?
It's a plurality of elders. It's not like the pastor of a church is over the elders. He's one of the plurality.
Right, but there's someone that's like, hey, Pastor Fred, and someone's like, hey, Elder Tom, like that for it's not like elder. Well, it's not like
It's not
elder.
originally the way it was. No. So eventually by about the 2nd century, and Sean will back me up on this, by about the 2nd century, you started seeing basically a preacher that would be the main preacher that would take over and be called the bishop, and then you had the presbyters. So that was an eventual development, but yeah, originally in the New Testament, elder and bishop were pretty much the same thing.
So two things to say.
Not one person in charge.
Yeah, so would you say in the first century then it was like a rotating clock? It's one person may teach one day, the next day, because they're also meeting a lot more frequently.
Yeah,
so
totally.
So it would be but except now we've extrapolated it further by denomination. I know what you were saying about in the 2nd century, the presbyter would be the kind of main guy of that church. Well, now depending on your denomination, like the Assemblies of God, they have a regional presbyter that is over multiple churches. I think Sean may call that would you call that a bishop in the Church of God or whatever? But basically, they'll have actual pastors of churches with elders kind of structurally underneath them, and then they'll have a presbyter that is not just the main pastor of that church. They'll typically call the main elder of that church pastor, and then they'll have a presbyter who's not even in that church. They're over a region. It's like a Walmart supervisor. They're over a conglomerate of other churches, and I think that may be taking it a little further than I don't know. What do you think about that, Chris? Is that taking it further than the Bible intended, or as it spread, that's just the natural flow of things?
Sort of the natural flow. They started building out the church more like the Roman Empire, the administration of the Roman Empire as time went on.
I mean, if we start building out too much, though, where do you draw the line between is just the natural flow that makes sense versus now we're Catholic and have tradition? Sean, maybe you're driving or busy talking. Let's see if this guy has a question. Let's see. Oh, okay. What answers do you have? I don't know. Ask something. Can you demonstrate to others that God exists? Well, yeah. I'll say, look within yourself, uncover the soot of I hate God and God doesn't exist on your soul, and you'll be like, God didn't need to be demonstrated. He was here all along. That would be the biblical answer. Read Romans 1. But a more practical knowledge is recognize that there's a lot you don't know. That's the thing. Oh my gosh. No. That's another point. Okay. If we're done here, I have another demonstrate to God. Look, on its face, to be a hard atheist, I don't know what Ron is or not. If you're a hard atheist, that's a very willfully ignorant position, because those are typically the same group of people promote ideas like, you Christians think you know everything, and then they'll show like a diagram of the known universe, and it's like, here's how much we know, which, quote, no. Here's how much we know, and it's like a sliver. Here's how much we know that we don't know, and there's a bigger sliver. And then like 80% of the pie is how much we don't even know we don't know. And they'll use that as a fight against Christians or theists to be like, see, how can you know your God is the true way? Look how much stuff we know we don't know, and how much stuff beyond that that we don't even know we don't know. Same answer. First of all, if we have the real thing, we don't need to know what other fake things there are. So we have the real thing, and this is God revealed in His Word. Read the Bible. You disagree? Fine. Answer before God someday. Welcome, Michael. It's been a while. Something to say to you in a minute, too. Anyway, we'll see what Michael thinks on this in a second. So, anyway, there's that. So, we are convinced, take us on our claim. This is competing claims. We claim to have the real thing. If we have the real thing and our claim is true, we don't need to know how much we don't know to know what we have is real. So I would say, to like Ron's question, I don't even know if he's still here, but his question is at least it should keep anyone from being a hard atheist that claims they know no God or gods exist, because of that same reasoning. We know how much we know, quote, know, because again, there's things we don't know and how much we think we know. Then there's how much we know we don't know. Then there's how much we will never know how much we don't know. So that should at least get someone to withhold judgment and be a genuinely pure, to the best of their abilities, agnostic at best, and just be like, I don't know. The Bible says you do, but the most fair position you can be, with being honest, and I think, deep down people know that, but I take them at their word, they're not lying when they tell me they don't. I believe they don't. I believe they believe that, and they're acting in good faith. But do some soul searching, that's the answer. Anyway, so that is the answer. Recognize there's so much you know that you can never know. So withhold judgment, and then think, could any of these gods be true? Let's see, which ones are not, which ones are reported as abject myth? Take the Norse gods. If Disney owns your god, Thor can still be real, peace be upon him. But the chances are, if Disney owns your god, probably not. So let's just put that one on the back burner and go later. Zeus, Hellenistic deities, Greek mythology. If Warner Brothers has been making Hercules since the 80s, doesn't mean they're wrong. Maybe Zeus exists, peace be upon him. But let's set that one to the back burner too. So the main religions of the world, you want to take Hinduism, fine. There's a lot of people believe that. You want to take Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, I guess, because they would be a minority religion, but the three Abrahamic ones the two other Abrahamic ones stem from them, which makes them kind of like big by way of Christianity or Islam. Investigate those. So obviously, I advocate for the Christian God, and as we learned from the Mahdi appears, he's going to have his own problems with Islam if anyone ever takes note.
That guy's hilarious.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we can get your commentary on that. I'll put a video in a little bit. Let me run through these chats real fast, and then we'll say hi to Michael. Let's see. God also died, as well as Christian, but Jews and Muslims, God is alive. Sure, whatever. Christian God didn't die. His body died. That's the price for our sins. But you can't truly kill a God. That's your point. Islam says you can't kill a God, and I agree. That's why Jesus resurrected. Let's see. You are silly. You're weak gods. Islam's God is alive. If you're repent, yes, repent and turn or burn. Are you scaring people into heaven? If someone is convinced that God or gods doesn't exist, no amount of fear is going to provoke a decision like that, so it doesn't matter in order to the point. Okay, we're caught up. Before I go to two big other things I had that I forgot about, Michael, welcome. I have not done a podcast since you and I have last spoken. And it continues to be.
Hey.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, sorry, just finishing something up. Yeah, I've been I was out yesterday and I didn't see, but I So you said if Disney owns your God. So I think Cecil DeMille is dead now, but he produced the Ten Commandments. So does that mean, was that Warner Brothers? Who is that? Does that mean that, so should I pay as much attention to it? So like if Warner Brothers owns your God, we shouldn't take that God seriously either. I mean, what about, Ben-Hur, King of Kings, all these different, like, there's been lots of movies
Passion of the Christ.
made about your imaginary friend too, right? So, it might be wise to say something like, if there's been a movie made about it, it probably isn't true. So that could be problematic. But the other thing is that, to say that someone should be an agnostic at best, how does that not hold for you as well? It's the biggest problem with that is it doesn't hold for you because you're convinced you've got the right one. The same as Muslims are convinced they've got the right one. Hindus, 1,000 years ago was the Norse pantheon, the Greek, all these other different. They're all convinced they've got the right idea, right? Norse, Greek, these other ones obviously being polytheistic and not monotheistic, but they're all convinced. The Aztecs were so convinced that they cut the heart out of a virgin every day to make sure that the sun came up the following day. They're all convinced they've got the right ones. So for you to say, to sit up there, so like the hubris needed to say, look, we know we're right. All of you other ones, you should just be agnostic and be fair. Come on, Nate.
Well, Michael, let me start by pointing out a glaring thing. When I say Disney owns these gods, I literally mean they have the copyrights to these gods. They have the copyrights to them. So the Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, no one, Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson is not claiming a copyright on Yahweh. That is a big difference in making a movie about the deity, about the Passion of the Christ, about the Ten Commandments with Moses. There's a huge difference in what I'm saying. No one is claiming to own the copyright of Yahweh. Someone's like, hey, who owns Thor? Disney's like, yep, we own that. Yep, he's in the Marvel Universe. We own Spider-Man. We own Mickey Mouse. We own, well, they don't own Mickey Mouse anymore. It's a Steamboat. That's why they're making murder massacres about beloved Disney characters, which is hilarious. But they're like, yeah, Thor, Odin, Odin's son, Loki, we own these gods in the Copyright Office. That's a glaring distinction, and that's what I was talking about in a tongue-in-cheek way. But since we've gone mean, I will say in a real way, yes, they own the patent. They own the copyright to Thor. No one is claiming to own the copyright to Yahweh. Secondly, this is one of those things where all fingers are thumbs, not all thumbs, or all thumbs are fingers, not all fingers are thumbs. Similar, not the same. It's not humorous if you listen with, I guess, good faith ears. I believe people who claim they have tapped into a deity that's not Christianity, I believe that they believe their claim. It's a competing claim. I believe their claim is wrong. But if their claim is they have the right thing, then they don't need to know how much stuff they lack knowledge of if they truly have the right thing. I obviously believe if it's not Christ, it is the wrong thing. But I'm not going to call them arrogant or something in the same way I would call a hard atheist that, because there is a difference. So I claim as a Christian that I have the right thing. It is the God of the Bible. It's been evidenced to me in a way that I can't reject. We don't choose our beliefs. I can't choose to not believe this stuff. So that is my claim that I have the right thing. The difference is the hard atheist would claim that they basically have to have knowledge of everything that can be known in order to claim that they now know there is nothing. Because in order to claim that there is nothing, they would rightly have to know everything that exists in order to say, I've looked under every rock and every dark corner, and there truly is nothing. I know this. That's what is required for them to claim victory of knowing nothing and being a hard atheist. That is a vastly different, incorrect or not, that's vastly different than the claim that different religions have, that they have the right thing, so they don't need to know obvious, I know no God exists. You've never met those people?
No, I've never met someone who would say that they know. I mean, with the exception of, like, for example, like, I would claim knowledge, and I would use the principle of fallibilism, right? And that you can have knowledge without absolute certainty, right? But with that caveat, I know your God doesn't exist, right? Like, I would say that all day long to you. But what's interesting is I have heard the opposite as well. I have heard people say that, in order to know there's no God, you either have to know everything, and the flip side to that is I can know that there is a God because I have knowledge from a God that knows everything. And I'm sorry, but you're just making that up. You can tell me that you you said, right? You can tell me you believe that, but don't tell me that you know it, right? The plural of anecdote is not evidence. And so you can tell me that you believe something, and you and I have had this discussion many times. When you say you know something, what you're really saying is you really, really, really believe it. That's fine. But that's not in the same way, and that's why I think it's important to have distinctions when you're talking to individuals and not to cast blanket statements. There are Christians that I've spoken to, like you, and I would include among them, who will say, like, to the best of their knowledge, is something they really, really, really believe. But I've also run into Christians who say, like, with no ambiguity whatsoever, I absolutely know this for a 100% fact. No, you don't.
Yeah, and I take your point, and whenever I said that to you, it's if I say I claim to know something, I would say you should hear that as you really, really, really believe it. But then there's, words have meaning and definition in terms is important. So for conversation's sake, I'd be like, look, if I claim I know something, and then your definition of knowing is I basically have to have it in my hand, it's tangible, like I know it that way, I'll say I take your point and I take your definition. But then if I'm claiming I know this God of the Bible is true and is real, it doesn't mean your definition for know. You should hear that as, well, Nate really, really, really believes this. But then if someone's like, Nate, you only have one word to say, what do you come down on? Well, if you want to know what I truly believe, the way I've defined it, for you should hear it as he really believes it. But for me, it's like, I know this God exists. And then if you put me through your definitions, can you have it in your hand? Can you hold it? I don't mean your definition of no, but if you want me to be the most honest I can in what I believe, that has to be the word no. And then we can talk about all the nuances for conversation, and you should hear that as this, and no, I can't meet your definition of no, meaning here's God, he's in my hands, you can see him, I can poke him, stuff like that. But then the last thing I was going to say, Michael, if I don't forget, it's like when people ask me in these debates with other Christians, they will say, how do you know it was God? God doesn't work in the supernatural way anymore. And it's like, look, if I narrowly avoid a car wreck and a car goes zooming by, like actually almost happened the other day. I don't know how I would attribute that. I didn't really think about it until right now. But if you get in a near-death accident or something like that, and a car just goes zooming right by you, whoa, and you jump back, are you going to say it was just coincidence, or is like, your intuition processing, hundreds of thousands of micro noticeabilities, and even though it was unconscious to you, your body was aware of it, or it was God? I'll say, well, look, there's some things that I think could have just been coincidences, but in specific things, I would think, no, it could, of course, be a coincidence. It could have been these, intuition, gut feelings that I wasn't aware of happening. It could have been chemicals in the food I ate before. But if you want me to give you what I actually believe, I believe God was responsible for this incident, saving me. So it's like, sure, could it be all these other things? Yes. What do I really believe? This instance, it was God. If you don't want me to lie to you.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. And I understand that when I'm talking to someone in the same way, like I'm talking to you, or if I'm talking to someone of another faith tradition, right? That they are, what's that word that gets coined all the time? Worldview, right? They're seeing things through their worldview. I get that, right? And so, I try my best, to be like reflective, right? With some, like if I can have a simple conversation with someone, get read out and stuff like that, then, and so yeah, I'll accept that that's where they're coming from. And I understand that from your perspective, you'll say these things, no, and I understand get where it's coming from, but I think it's how vigorously you are looking to defend your position, and just stand on a box and claim how right you are, versus how much you're prepared to actually have the discussion, have the conversation. Do you want to come to any type of a meeting of minds, right? I mean, outside of this forum, I would encourage anyone listening to this, right, who's hearing me kind of be maybe a little harsher than I have been other times. Go back a little more than a week ago. I was on the Ask a Christian podcast, and Nate and I had a discussion. And some Christians, like probably Chris, would think it was disgusting because we spent 90 minutes doing nothing but mostly agree. And so it's but that's the kind of meeting like for like so on and so forth. Yeah, but anyway, does that make sense?
Well, yes, and so much of it, people like pick up personality cues, right? So, I would be among the people that many of the world would consider the most funny, the most intolerant, the most closed-minded, because I believe Christianity is exclusive, right? There is one God. It is the Creator God. It is Jesus, the God of the universe, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I believe it's very traditional, fundamental, exclusive. It's Jesus or hell. But you would say, well, it depends how vigorously you say that. And I would say theologically, very hard. But so it's more personality types. If someone's yelling and screaming in your face with like spittle coming out of their mouth and their face is turning red, you're going to have a very different view of that person based on personality versus me, which is just not my MO. I'm like, what I just said, I'm like, look, unless you turn, you're going to burn. Like, repent, believe the gospel, or you'll spend eternity in a literal, torturous hell, lake of fire. I don't want that. God has a better way. This is my view. And I guess because I don't scream it, people are like, well, Nate's nice. And, he's more gentle. Well, personality-wise, yes, that's just kind of how I am. But theologically, I'm saying exactly the same thing as the other guy. But anyways, Michael.
No, yeah, and we've had that. In fact, we had that discussion a little over a week ago, where you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, if I'm paraphrasing what you said, from a quote-unquote fundamentalist perspective, you're pretty damn fundamental. But it's, and so I think we also talked about, kind of the means and the message, right? Stuff like that. So yeah, I think, I don't think I think we're just going to discuss a bunch of people and come to more agreement.
Michael, the last thing maybe before I have to go.
Well, I have to go as well too.
I would have loved your take. I mean, I
have to go in a minute, so I mean, like, I can give you a couple, but yeah.
Okay, well, it's basically going to present it the way that you have to agree. Because I'm that reasonable.
Challenge accepted.
Well, I mean, the challenge there just means we'll go until I find something you agree on. The sky's blue. So, okay, are you familiar with Dr. Richard Carrier?
The sky's not blue. Actually, the only reason it appears on
refraction of the water.
Because of light refraction, yeah.
Okay, we agree on that.
Well, what is color if not just light refracting off things?
I agree. Yeah, it's
So you're conceding that the sky is in fact blue because of light refraction?
No, not really. No, not really, because in different. So why is the sky blue at night?
Are you familiar with Richard Carrier?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I've
okay,
met
so
him a couple of times.
In this week of exile, I was going back through some of my old transcripts, trying to data pull it before YouTube figures out I'm a Christian, saying Jesus is the only way and bans me. So I was getting all the transcripts downloaded. So I was going through the transcripts, and one of the earlier conversations I had was with Richard Carrier, and I was just going back over this, and I'm like, man, when you know better, do better. And back in the day, I sounded Chris, I sounded a lot like, I don't want to say names, but there's someone here, and I sound a whole lot like them in like bright-eyed, bushy tail. I'm like, oh my gosh, you dear dummy Nate. It wasn't the content, it was the presentation, which still I'm just about as twitchy and sporadic as I was then. But anyway, so I was going back through one of the earlier conversations I had with Richard Carrier, and this is before a lot. This is when we were like trusting, generally speaking, of governments and history, and we of Jesus, and we had this point where he was stuck on the was it between Gospel of Matthew and Luke? I think maybe I think it was Matthew and Luke. It could be one of the other Gospels, but it's about the census, and it was his whole argument was basically because we know Roman scholarship and we know how the census worked. We know that maybe it was Mark. We know that one of these Gospels has to be a forgery because the way they presented the census is entirely wrong from how Rome did it. Have you heard that critique of the Bible, of the Gospels?
Yeah, it's actually, and he talks about it in on the historicity of Jesus, which is the second in his two-part series. And there's two books. First is Proving History, where he lays out kind of his arguments around Bayesian probability and stuff like that, and then he applies Bayesian probability to Jesus, like in the second book on the historicity of Jesus. So yeah, I've heard it.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, I'm like, what a time! Like, this is a great example of how we think we're having very enlightened arguments, and we think we're so well versed, but just given it's been about 10 years since that discussion. 10 years. It's been about 10 years since that discussion happened, and so much more that we didn't know has now come to light just about the world around us. That if we had known that then, that certainly would have been a sticking point. And it's like, look, we can only do the best with what we know. Like when we were wrong about the universe, we think about a billion years. We're like, okay, well now we have better tools, and now we have to correct it by a billion years, unless we're still wrong. So we can always do better as we know better, but that means we need more information. So basically, the whole thing about the census is we know it is a Jewish custom to kind of operate under the guise of the census. So why either forgery, because that's not how Rome did census, that this guy, Mark or Luke, I think it was Luke, but Luke, or whoever wrote the census account, did it tailoring to a Jewish custom. And it's like, well, it either has to be a forgery, and he's doing this to placate the Jewish tradition, or he doesn't know anything about how Roman censuses worked. And it just seems that now we have the knowledge of all this, the way the world really works, even more so than we did a decade ago. And it's like, it would be nothing to know that when people representing, like as ambassadors, and they are, a pilot or governors who get so far away from their home base, in this case from Rome, thousands of miles away, Roman Empire, sure, but does that mean these people didn't take liberties? Or because Pilate was constantly fearful of Jewish uprisings or rebellions, why couldn't he have tweaked the idea of how they did a census to appease the Jewish customs a little bit more? And you just think, well, there's no evidence that he did that, but there's no evidence, and it's kind of consistent with common operation, that when people in power get far removed from their center of power, they many times take the law into their own hands and do whatever they want with disregard for their own governorship. And that doesn't mean that's what happened here, but that should go a long ways in taking ammunition out of that argument. And it's like, what, you're saying that the Roman Empire faithfully executed the will of Rome thousands of miles away? You can make that case, but, you can just as easily, more so now, say, what happens when people get power and they're far removed from their home base? A lot of corruption.
Yeah, I'm not even sure. So, I mean, when last I kind of looked into it a little bit, Richard Carrier has also softened his stance a little bit on the whole mythicism take. I think he's almost going the way now, a little bit more closer to Bart Ehrman. At least that was my take on the slant. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him personally, but I haven't spoken to Richard in about 8 years or so. So I don't know for sure. But no, I also, from
up, Michael? Yeah,
Yeah.
I should be back now. So yeah, I should be back to my daily things here.
Yeah, I gotta bail. I got 1 minute before I gotta go.
All right.
All right,
Well, yeah, I guess take care. Good to see everyone. And yeah, I did try to do a Twitter or X Spaces yesterday to see how that went because I don't know, just seeing what's out there. People also told me TikTok. I'm not sure if I want to dip my toe into that pile. But anyway, if anyone has suggestions about that, let me know. But yeah, so you can find me on X now. Maybe it will be more viable. I found out that I can start from a browser-based thing. I don't have to use my tablet, which is really convenient. Except I just created my account, so I have like 3 followers.
What's your X profile?
Do you have to say at, or do you just say the profile? How do you do it on X?
What I would do is copy the link to the profile and put it in the chat, unless it's super easy to remember.
Yeah, it's super easy. I was just gonna tell you, like, how do you say it? Do you say at this, or just say it's Ask a Christian QA?
All one word?
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
I don't need to do spaces, right?
And you made this profile specifically so that you could debate with Jay Dyer. So,
I'm curious where that came from.
oh, just that he runs the big like Twitter debate spaces, and often when people go on Twitter to watch the sort of debate. Are you familiar with Twitter Spaces?
Well, yeah, that's what I tried to do yesterday, and I just got a handle on it enough that it functionally, if I works down, it can be done from a browser, so it's convenient, but it's not profitable because I don't know yet how to show up in spaces to get like to put up my welcome mat, so I don't know if I have to hashtag something appropriately, or if they automatically list live spaces so people can find me, or if it's based on the amount of followers because I just created the account, so I have like 3 people. So if it's based on followers.
But you have 10 now, so you're on your way.
Oh yes, thanks. So yeah,
For anyone who doesn't have the Ask a Christian podcast, I'm copying the link to his Twitter profile and putting it in the chat of this space. Please recognize all the hard work this man is doing. Click on his link and become one of his. And remember, it's okay if he only has a few followers. Jesus only had 12 followers. It's fine. Give Nate a follow, and let's help him out in his new venture.
why thank you. So yeah, I would like to. I'm definitely interested in X Spaces because I think long term it could be good. And if nothing else, it's a backup because it's only going to be a matter of time before Clubhouse does some boneheaded move again and alienates.
Clubhouse is dead. Like this app is a joke. If you want people in your Twitter spaces, my first piece of advice would just be to go into other people's spaces because people tend to follow back when they meet you and when you're not a complete turd.
Yeah, I haven't heard Jay Dyer talk a lot about orthodoxy and his religious views. I tend to listen. He used to be on a podcast I listened to quite a bit, and he would like guest host sometimes, and he would talk about a lot of like political subversion and like the occult and yeah, and those are really interesting. But yeah, I don't know a lot about
so he's graduated a bit, and 2 or 3 nights a week he'll do a space with the blessing of his bishop in the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia to debate all comers on the righteousness of the Eastern Orthodox Church. He'll debate Protestants, evangelicals, Mormons, Muslims, Roman Catholics, Oriental Orthodoxy. He takes all comers. You might actually, this might be for you.
Yeah, that's interesting, except I think it'll just do blasé from my point of view, because it's like, well, look, can we, don our Crusader uniforms and fight? I mean, I guess, but it's like, there's only a couple big sticking points, right? And it's pretty much going to be, if the debate is about, with an Eastern Orthodox or Catholic or Protestant, the debate is probably not going to be about the risen Jesus. It's inevitably going to go to, yeah, Christ is King, Jesus is Lord, yep, okay. But it's like, but wait, who's church? So it's always going to turn back to, who's the real true church, and that where it's just like, I'm like, I don't hardly have it in me. It's kind of like the beginning topic. One of the beginning topics is it's just going to be a bunch of competing claims, and there's going to be enough blank space in there that no one can abject claim victory in a way that will cause other people to believe it, because if they could, they would. So there's enough wiggle absolutely can be, well, there's not bulletproof evidence. There's only inferences like, well, we know Timothy was not to be despised because of his youth, therefore single, and how youthful was he? 14, 30, 25? So it's just a bunch of wiggle room that you can kind of, no one can claim absolute victory. And again, I say that as a Protestant who wants to claim absolute victory. You would say that as an Orthodox who wants to claim absolute victory. But unfortunately, there's enough gray area, which good news is there's no gray area in the resurrected Jesus. Believe in the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. If you believe in him, you will never die. So there's no gray area in that, the thing that really matters. And then it just falls to, well, if you're a part of a church that says you can only be truly saved in the church and the church saves you, well, you can get mad and fight, or I will choose to just believe the Bible.
But you're already begging the question that the definition of the true church is based on what the church says.
Well,
right.
right.
So I could go to church today, and if what I said was correct, would you accept it as the one true church?
Well, what I was saying was before that. So before we get to the first century church, before we get to anything that Jesus built his house upon any kind of rock, we get Jesus himself. So Jesus precedes the creation of the church, the building of the church. I mean, precedes incarnately because man, but also precedes truly because God. So he says, John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. So this is outside any church, because any church, Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, whatever the one true church is, the body of Christ, but any type of church claim came after Jesus established the church. So the words of Jesus, hopefully everyone's going to say, yes, that matters. And I don't know how people work that with the Catholic saying, no, you have to be in the Catholic Church, Orthodox, different Orthodoxy saying you have to be in our church, because Jesus himself
What we
says,
say
if
is
you
that
believe,
we are the Catholic Church, that's what we say.
well, global Catholic Church, not Roman Catholic Church, right?
Well, no, we're the Romans too, because Byzantium is the Eastern Roman Empire, so we claim the word Roman and we claim the word Catholic, which is our word, which is invented in Greek for the Greek, created by the Greek Church.
Well, but do you mean that the same way as a Catholic would say I'm Roman Catholic?
You're begging the question by calling them Catholics. I call them Latins or Papists.
Well, no, that's what I said. I said when they say, so I recognize begging the question, but I'm also speaking third party. So like, when you say Catholic, you mean global, right? Like global church.
When I say Catholic, I'm referring to the remainder of the early church, which is the Orthodox Church.
Okay, so everyone who is a part of that church, when you claim Catholic, you mean in the global sense, and by global sense, everyone who is a part of that church.
So, I mean, are you familiar with Orthodoxy broadly?
Very broadly.
Yeah, so there's a really, really good introduction to the church by a bishop who died a few years ago, a wonderful man named Timothy Ware, W-A-R-E. And he makes this point, I think, in the first chapter of the book, which is if you present yourself to the Patriarch of Constantinople, who, for want of a better expression, is the leader of the Orthodox Church on earth, and ask him if he is Catholic, he'll say yes. And if you present yourself to the Bishop of Rome and ask him if he's Orthodox, he'll say yes. So there's a whole lot of battle here over vocabulary that doesn't correctly describe the expression, except to say that it's annoying to just come online and see the debate framed every day as, oh no, it's Catholics against Protestants and Catholics against Protestants, which in our conception ignores like the true victor of that battle.
Well, interesting. Good talk.
Yeah, no, I'll send you the book, and I'll send you Jay Dyer's Spaces, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. Yeah, please check out AskAChristianPodcast.com, and if you'd also like to be my guinea pigs, I would super appreciate it, because every time I look at my website, there seems to be something broken or wrong, but then if I refresh a few times, it clears up. So I don't know if I'm having a bad cache issue, which I hope is the case, but if it looks all broken and weird for you guys, please let me know, because I would like to, have a working website. So I think it should be good. I think mobile devices are the biggest issue. Desktop should not be any issue. But anyways, thanks for being here, everyone. I appreciate it. Please, yes, follow on Ask a Christian QA, all one word. On X, that is the new place I'm trying to pop up. So at the very least, I have a backup for Clubhouse. At the very best, I have a new ship to climb on board.
If you follow me back on there, I can send you